celebrating LGBTQ plus voices in Ireland. We have some incredible panelists with us today: Victoria's Secret and Viola Gavis, two incredible Irish drag queens, and then two activists, Dan Bizet and Philippa Ryder. Voices in Ireland. Sorry, I think I froze for a slight minute. I'm Maeve Hurley, and I'm the events convener of the College Historical Society, or the HIST, and I'm here with two of my pro-ents, Eva and Kate, and we'll be hosting this panel for you today. Just very, very swiftly, before we get into all of our incredible questions for our amazing guests today, the HIST is a debating society of Trinity College Dublin, and so we are very, very interested in kind of facilitating discussion on all kinds of topics. The ENS department particularly, we really want to facilitate as many panels as possible throughout this entire year. During Freshers Week, we had a racism in Irish education panel, a sustainable fashion panel, Irish women in music panel, and we just really want to keep going like that this year. So we thought it was essential that we did something for Rainbow Week in Trinity College, along with our debate last night, which was "This House regrets straight people at gay bars," and we'll be talking a little bit about that throughout this discussion today. So just before we get into all of our wonderful questions, I'd just like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves very briefly and just say a small bit about their work, who they are and what they do, before we get into the questions. So maybe if we can, I see Philippa first, maybe if Philippa could begin just by introducing yourself.
Hello everybody, and thank you so much, Maeve, and everybody in the HIST for inviting me along today. It's a pleasure and even an honour to be part of this. So I was thinking about this as I cycled home earlier from work, and I thought to myself, okay, how would I describe myself? Okay, activist, obviously, but number one is my connection to Trinity through my daughter, and I think my number one way to describe myself would be as a parent to a wonderful daughter who was in shock horror at the Phil, as Maeve knows, and but I'm also a wife to a wonderful woman who stayed with me through my transition, and that leads on to me being transgender. I'm a civil servant. I've been working in the same department for almost 40 years, a lot more than most of you have been born, I would imagine. And I'm director of Under the Rainbow, which is a well-being, diversity, inclusion, and therapy company based in Capel Street. And I've been very involved in LGBTQ plus activism for kind of about 15, 16 years. When I really started to come to terms with my own gender identity is basically when I started becoming really active. So that's enough about me.
Lovely, thank you. Maybe Dan, you could go next.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Dan. Like Philippa said, it's a difficult thing to kind of present yourself, and how do you kind of describe yourself as a person in this kind of context. But the result that I kind of came to was that I am a purveyor of knowledge. I try and spread as much knowledge and as much information and awareness about various political topics as I can, and as is kind of warranted of my situation. I am a singer, and I'm a musician, I'm an actor, but most importantly, I'm someone that kind of stands for justice and for what's right, and making sure that people understand kind of the difference between right and wrong in a social context. I'm currently studying classical studies with English at King's College London, so I'm coming to you live from chilly East London. And I've been kind of politically engaged since 2015, so not quite 15 years, but we'll get there. And I've been kind of very involved in kind of different political movements and different awareness raising since 2015, since kind of the very beginning of the marriage referendum, and I was kind of heavily involved in that and haven't looked back since.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. How about you, Victoria, now, if that's okay?
Sure. Hi everyone at home. My drag name is Victoria's Secret, and out of drag, my name is Philip Kyo. I'm doing drag, I honestly don't really know, and I don't care to figure out exactly how long, but I'm gonna say 16 years. I started doing drag in IADT, which maybe some of the Trinity students might know that college because we certainly crushed many of the queer sock parties in Trinity over our time there, and Rainbow Week being definitely something that we managed to get particularly messy at with everyone. I'm doing drag about 16, 17 years now at this point. I'm sorry I'm not in drag at the moment. It takes 2 to 2.5 hours, and I just put up my Christmas tree today because I can't take lockdown anymore, and that was enough of a job to do today. I'm also a promoter, so I work bringing acts from around the world into Dublin and help across the UK and Europe as well. My company's called Dragged Up, and we produce, we did produce, I should say, a lot of events until lockdown happened. And now I mostly spend my time trying not to put on more than 10 pounds in lockdown and creating a lot of digital events, constantly just trying to upskill and learn how the internet can keep us in work, basically.
Amazing, and I can't wait to get back to you about all of those digital events that you're running, and aren't we all trying not to gain weight during lockdown? Oh my god, same. Viola?
Hi, I'm Viola Gavis, that is my drag name, and when I'm not, well, right now I'm coming to you as Donald Mazondo. I am a drag queen, obviously, in Dublin, and I've been doing it a year. It was a year in August. And so I don't really have as much experience on the scene, on the drag scene, as Victoria would. And I am doing computer science, software engineering in Maynooth, so that's why I'm not dressed or in drag today, because the thesis is kicking me around this week. I have so many deadlines to meet. I would consider myself, well, besides the drag, and I would say an activist, but I came into my own a lot more so this year in lockdown when the Black Lives Matter movement came about, because I used to be very vocal, but I just became more vocal because, you know, I have a bigger platform than I would have before I started doing drag. So I just said I'll start using that. Before this, I wouldn't even say I was like a political person as such, but like with lockdown, I've come into my own with, like, you know, learning things and reading about things and stuff like that. But yeah, lockdown has been a lot of learning for everybody. But besides, I'm just a 23-year-old drag queen from Dublin mostly. Yeah.
That's great, and I can't wait to again delve into everything that you've done to do with the Black Lives Matter movement a little bit later, and I wish you all the best of luck with your thesis. Oh my god, I feel the same way.
Thank you.
So many deadlines. So I think we have a really good range of people here to really get into all of these questions that we'll be getting into. We've got basically 3 topics today. First of all, kind of a background topic about growing up queer in Ireland and what that was like and what that meant. And secondly, kind of the role of drag queens and drag performance in the celebration of queer culture and what that means as well. And then finally, kind of more about activism and about very particularly creating spaces for the LGBTQ plus community in Ireland, online, on campuses, in all kinds of ways. Wonderful. So just before we get started, I'd like to just say, if you have any questions for any of our wonderful panelists today, please ask them in the chat or through the Q&A function, and we'll get to as many questions as possible at the very end of for the last about 10 minutes. So do put them in there and I will get to you at some point. Wonderful. So just to kind of begin with a background question, I suppose, and this is for all panelists, anyone who wishes to answer. What was your experience growing up LGBTQ plus in Ireland? What struggles did you face? And on the other side of the coin, have elements of your experience been exciting or encouraging or rewarding in any kind of way? If it's okay, let's start off with Dan, and we'll start off a new person each time. How about you, Dan?
Yeah.
What was it like?
I had a largely positive experience to begin with. And obviously kind of through my time, and like you said, there are kind of special moments that you kind of reflect on and you say, well, that was a great period of time in my life. I knew that kind of something was amiss, and I think it's a kind of an intrinsic part of the queer journey where something is kind of not sitting 100% right in your soul, and you realize you have that kind of eureka moment where something might not be exactly as you think you are. There's you're different from your school friends, or your interests are kind of radically different from a lot of other people. And for me, that kind of that eureka moment happened in 4th class. So I was very, very young when that initially happened. And then I came out initially when I was 15, and I was kind of confident then that I, as a gay person in Dublin at the time. And that's kind of when a lot of the difficulties started arising. I went to an all-boys school, an all-boys rugby school in Dublin. And as someone who is not that way inclined, shall we say, I very much struggled to kind of untie myself from the status quo of what it meant to be a student at that school. And it was very difficult for me at first. And I struggled heavily with kind of my own identity. And then in turn, then my relationships with other people kind of suffered as a result of that. Then in 2018, I decided to leave that school and go to a different school. And in 2018, that's when I kind of discovered performance art and drag and performing on stage. And through that medium of performance, it was where I was able to discover within my own gender identity and my own transness, using that kind of performance art space. And the Irish drag scene and the Irish kind of performance scene is just, I'm kind of indebted to them eternally for kind of how graciously they accepted me with open arms, and the friends that I've made kind of over that period of time. So I guess kind of to summarize, I struggled a lot in my teen years, and a lot, and really, really heavily. And it was difficult for me as a queer person kind of experiencing massive turnarounds in their own kind of identity and personality. It was really hard, but it's about kind of struggling through that darkness and finding the resources there that eventually, and I think more importantly in my case, the people that were there to kind of help me through that period of time.
Absolutely. Viola?
Well, for me, it was kind of weird, especially coming from, like, as a Black person, it's kind of like it was a very double-edged sword. But for me, it was a way that people knew there was something different about me before I knew there was something different about me. And I never delved into it, and I never thought about it up until I had left school, or like I left school. I honestly started coming into my own and starting to feel comfortable with myself a whole lot more when I got to college, and I started making friends and seeing friends from whole other, walks of life, people who were very different than I went to. Like, that's not saying my school wasn't very progressive. Like, I was amongst the first 6 years to graduate from my school. So it was a very new school. It was a very open school. Everybody was welcomed with open arms. But there was always still that that unspoken thing that I didn't know about myself, but other people just were like, he's different, but I didn't know I was different. And I literally just brushed it aside until I went to college, and then I joined the Men with Pride Society, and I just started learning more and more about, people coming from different walks of life and all that. And then it wasn't until I started going out into clubs and everything, I just started coming into, and it was the same situation. Me and my best friend kind of had the same trajectory, that she didn't know herself until like after we had left school, and we were just discovering ourselves as our own people, and we didn't have these influences of being in school, of people saying, well, everybody else is doing this, we should do that. So we were out of that mindset, and we just, we're exploring more about ourselves. But I still think I'm still figuring out where I stand and everything, but I feel like I'm mostly there, but growing up, it was really that thing of people knew about me before I knew about myself. So I never went through the stages of feeling like I was left out, because in my head, I hadn't connected those dots. You could say I was a late bloomer, for want of a better word. So I had never thought about it until, I started being exposed to a lot more of it. So this is not saying somebody made me the way I am. It was always underlying, it was always there. And I had never gotten in touch with it. And it was also the way we grew up, and the way my culture and everything is very different. It's not seen well, now it's a lot better, but like before, it used to be seen as a very taboo situation that it was like, you know, it wasn't right. But as time has gone on, people have seen, you know, and people have changed. But I think it wasn't until after school that I felt like I started growing up and I started coming into my own. So it was a little bit later for me than most people would have been coming into themselves.
I think college is probably a massively transitional time for most queer people, that you really get exposed to so many new things and all of those kinds of like performance art spaces that you wouldn't have before. So I completely understand that. How about you, Victoria?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you go to college, you can retell your story. There's a lot of people who you've never met before, and it's a little chance to go, okay, I'm gonna totally be maybe my authentic self, or else I'm gonna work towards being my authentic self. And I don't think that just reflects on queer people. I feel like school is quite a distressing situation if you are not the rugby person, or if you're not you know, any sport in general. God, I hated PE so much because I didn't even want to put on those hurling helmets. See, I don't even know the words. The hurling helmets. I was like, oh, they're gross. Every boy in school has worn them for 20 years. Like now, like, you know, I had nothing to relate to these people that were so excited about it. I think I knew I was different from around first class. I just knew that there was something not the same as me, but I didn't know what it was. But I also knew, and I think this is very part of being an Irish person, that you don't want to stand out as being different. We're so afraid of being different than our next door neighbors. And whatever it was, I knew I didn't need to show that to people. I had fascinations with boys in my class from the age of maybe 6 or 7, but I didn't know what that was. I just thought they were really cool. I was like, oh my God, he's deadly. I want to be his best friend. And then because of that, as I like grew up and I went to secondary school, that was a game changer, because all of a sudden, you know, hormones and everyone started, you know, like coming into action, and everyone changed quite a lot. You know, the boys weren't as soft as they were. They could be quite harsh towards each other. And I really went very quiet throughout my whole secondary school years. I didn't speak. If I was asked to read in class, it was terrifying. I had a very small group of friends, and I kept to them, and they were deadly, and I loved them. But yeah, and then once I got to about 15, I knew, but I also was still dating girls, and I mean, I think at the time I didn't acknowledge what fluidity really in general was, and I'm not bisexual, but I just feel that, you know, not everything belongs in a box now that I'm 36 years of age. It's actually okay not to give everything a term. And yeah, so by the time I was about 17, I decided I just needed to get through the end of 6th year. And as soon as I went to college, that was it, bam, and I flew out of the closet. And, you know, not authentically either. I went from, you know, not wanting to be noticed to dressing head to toe in baby blue. I had every different hairstyle, hair color that you could possibly have. I thought I needed to be like Will and Grace. And I'm 36 now and I only wear black clothes. I'm really not that interested in sticking out from the crowd at all. It just took a while to figure out who I was. And I think, you know, that's a big problem of like schools is, you know, you're expected to wear the same uniform. There's a dress code for you. There's a hair code for you. All of these things that, you know, you're supposed to like look exactly the same actually is really negative on you if you are not, you know, similar to the others. So yeah, that's, I think I answered the question. I got so into the other two's answers that I almost forgot the questions. And I'm also bemused about where Philippa's cat has disappeared to, because I was quite enjoying that cat photo.
We all were. We love that cat. I absolutely agree. I think like the repressive nature of Irish Catholic society ends up manifesting in like school rules and the way that schools operate so much. So I absolutely agree. How about you, Philippa?
Well, Victoria, the cat's sitting happily on the pillow here beside me, so hopefully she'll stay there. You both mentioned, actually, Victoria and Maeve, you mentioned about college and coming out in college. Well, so did I, in a manner of speaking. I did a degree in surveying in Bolton Street when I was 35. So I was a mature student, and that was around the 1995, 1996. Now, I'm a lot older than everybody else on here. And as a result, I've got different experiences. I mean, I was growing up, I first came to terms actually, Viola and Dan, I think pretty much the same time. Between first and fifth class is when I started to really wonder just who I was. But then I thought everybody did. And I think still everybody does wonder because nobody's 100% formed from the womb. You develop and you mature and you get new interests and you become a different person, hopefully a better person as you grow older. So I first started though questioning my identity, dressing, and so on at around age, will we say 10 or 11. And all through my teenage years, I was denying who I was because this was in the 1970s when there was no information available. I mean, there was no internet. Everything was sensationalized in the media. So you certainly weren't going to be putting putting your head above the parapet to be shot down. And I couldn't possibly say it to parents or to friends or family. There was no chance. But I think it was Dan who mentioned I it was a very interesting discussion I had when a friend of mine, my best friend at that stage, took me down for a coffee in Bewley's in Grafton Street when it was open, and he came out to me as gay. That was when we were about 14 or 15, and I was surprised. I was almost shocked because I'd never met, as far as I knew, anybody gay before. And the reason I mentioned that is because it must have been about 25 years later, I came out to him as trans. And he said, you know, I knew I wasn't seeing the true you. I knew that there was something else to you. And I knew you weren't gay, but I didn't know what was different, what you were really. And I don't think you did then either. And that just hit home so hard with me because other people, and I think it was you, Dan, actually, who said that somebody else knew or had guessed about you before you knew yourself. And that is so true in my case as well. Other people around me were seeing these things. Of course, other people, even when I was going into my civil service job, dressed androgynously and wearing perfume and lip gloss and everything, people were just so caught up in their own lives that they didn't pay any attention and didn't notice. And it was a big shock horror when I actually did come out, and it was gave me great amusement value as well. So I mean, I have a lot of stories to tell, which I'm not going to do in the 37 minutes left. So that's more or less enough about me.
That's a really incredible story. I think there's such a change in the last many years in Ireland. And I think that if it's okay, I'll kind of ask you the next question then, Philip, to kind of come on off from that. What does the word pride mean to you? And specifically, kind of how has that word or the function of that word or the concept of that word or the manifestation of that word changed in your lifetime, whether through like pride parades or like kind of the more celebrating of pride? Has that been good? Has it been bad? Just how has pride changed in Ireland in the last however many years?
Well, my first pride mate was around 2005, 2006, and it was a very emotional, and in fact, the word emotion is the one that I would attribute best to pride, because for me, I was just about starting to transition, and I brought my daughter in to O'Connell Street, and we stood on the sidelines and watched the Pride Parade going by. Now, I can't remember how many people would have been in it at that stage. Thousands, but not tens of thousands, probably. And I stood on the sidelines watching it going by with my eyes full of tears because I knew this was my community. I knew these were my people. But I couldn't come out to my daughter at that stage. It was too early. She was only 10, really. But what gave me hope was the people around, the ordinary Dubliners watching this and saying just how delighted they were for the people in the parade. Aren't they great? aren't the gays great? Isn't it lovely to see, etc. I didn't hear one negative comment. And I like to think that it's only gotten better since then. Now, I know the commercialism of Pride and so on, and Pride, yes, of course, was a protest, and it should absolutely, and I know that's an aspect that you want to discuss later on, Maeve. And of course, it should still be a protest because we haven't got everything we need. How has it changed over the years? It's got bigger, obviously, which is brilliant. It is, and it's no longer a single Saturday in June. It's now, what is it, a week or even 2 weeks of celebrations, because there's so much to discuss. There's so much to talk about. So many parties to have, so many events and so on. It's just amazing. It's an amazing experience. It's quite different to how it was back in 2005. And then growing up, I mean, I think the first Pride was early 90s, and there's no way I would have been there. And to hear the negative comments, both from my family and from friends about what was going on, even if it was mentioned, and then it was always negative. So it has changed for me quite a bit, but I think it's very positive. I think there are still changes to be made to it, to maybe get it back towards a little bit more protest and prove to people and show people that we do need to still do things.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Victoria, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. I mean, there's so many stories involved in Pride. Like the turning point for Pride was the murder of Declan Flynn, which is coming up to 40 years in 2022, where a gang of youths attacked him in Fairview Park, and not one of them went with a prison sentence. Not one of them were given a prison sentence. And that was because essentially it was a very homophobic situation, and people were like, okay, the gay died, and did he deserve it? And that was almost how people were feeling. So that year after that prison sentence was handed or not handed down, Pride became a major movement. Before it was kind of low key. People were outraged. They couldn't believe that these people had walked free. I think the core of it still is to educate people, because the only way people are going to lose their discriminatory feelings is learning about each other. Because often when we find out the full story, and that's why I'm so interested to hear, say, Viola's story, Dan's story, Philippa's story, because I mean, I will learn something off everyone today, that kind of way. And I think that's the important thing for us all to remember about what Pride is, especially as more companies get involved every year. I think some people seem to find issue with the fact that companies are getting involved. I think it's also really important that all their employees feel that they're in an environment that they are supported, that they can be who they are. Sounds like, Philippa, you had a decent experience with your own job, and I hope you did. But I know that there's been lots of other situations where people have stayed in the closet and not come out because they couldn't face going into the office. It just wasn't for them. So I think there is an importance of including those companies as well. But as long as the message stays true, because in Ireland, not everyone is treated equally. There's still a long way to go. And also we need to push that message across the world to the countries that aren't as far forward as we are, to give them hope. Ireland was a very different place 40 years ago. And to show them that they can get places. Look at what's happening in Poland and Russia at the moment. They're so close to Ireland. Like part of Europe, Poland is so close. We have so many Polish people living here, and it's not safe for LGBTQ people over there at the moment.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, that companies need to be involved to kind of understand the community, and therefore change systems within the company to make it easier for LGBTQ plus employees, which I think that rainbow capitalism is kind of a big thing that we end up talking about in debating quite a lot, whether that's good, kind of the commercialization or the commodification of the rainbow symbol and what that means for the entire community. I think that's a really good point for you to have. Would any other panelists like to kind of discuss what Pride means to them just before we move on?
I'd like to just very, very quickly, because I think my kind of my newish, relatively speaking, experience of Pride has been seeing it kind of from a youth perspective. My first Pride was in 2015, and actually I was thinking about it just there. There's a photo of Victoria and I from, that was the very first time I ever met a drag queen ever. And it was Victoria, and it was in Smithfield Square, and I was wearing this ratty, like, it was like the heyday of flower crowns, and I was wearing this like ratty crop top, and I look back at the photo and cringe. But it's also really important, I think, that as a young person, to be able to, and kind of like Philippa mentioned earlier, like to be able to see, and even kind of the general public's perception of Pride now has definitely shifted. As a young person anyway, the youth perception of Pride has come out, that a lot of my friends will say, okay, well, you know, we understand that, you know, it's you know, during the summer, and it's, you know, usually on the Saturday weekend is the parade, but what is Pride? And when the 100th anniversary of Stonewall happened in 2019, I kind of did a month of kind of queer history on Instagram, and every single day I would kind of talk a little bit about a certain aspect of queer history and queer culture. You know, as Victoria mentioned, you know, the Fairview Park murder, and of a kind of queer history in Ireland and around the world. But I think definitely the perception of Pride has changed from kind of, as Philippa said, when its inception in the 90s, definitely kind of changed from a kind of an aggravated and antagonistic view to definitely one of kind of more acceptance, and also kind of curiosity. What is Pride and what does it mean? And this is a perfect example, you know, the questions of what Pride means to each individual person.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before that, those are really interesting questions, guys, all of or answers. There, just a lot of you spoke about how performance art was like almost an exposure to the community, and how important that was for you, like growing up, to kind of understand yourself and understand the kind of workings of the communities that you will end up identifying with. And I think drag performance is massive within that. So just before I hand it over to Kate to ask some questions to our wonderful drag queens here today, I'd like to say I'm a massive fan of both of you and all of your work. I haven't had the pleasure to see you in person yet, either of you, but everything I've seen on like YouTube, I saw like a video from the George of Victoria's Secret, your like performances in the George, and you were wearing like this incredible like ruffled yellow like leotard dress, and Viola, like your organization of the Ireland Cares kind of internet show during the summer, just featuring so many incredible like Irish drag queens and performance artists and like songwriters and pole dancers and everyone. It was so inspiring to see that. So I'm a massive fan of both of you. Kate, would you like to continue the questions there?
Absolutely. I'm also a massive fan of both of you. I've seen Victoria many times. As I said in my message to her, I'm a little bit obsessed. Viola, I haven't had the pleasure of seeing you yet, but I'm sure I will when things get back to normal. This first question is really for either of you. Could you explain how drag as like a performance art is intertwined with queer culture, and how drag is connected to queer culture for you?
Okay, yeah, sure. I think firstly, the scene has gotten bigger, and it welcomes absolutely everyone. But beforehand, I really feel that drag came from a moment of creating our own stars within our own little community that was a safe space that people could go and watch their people perform, just like in a way that, you know, like every town has a musical theatre society. If you kind of think of it like that, it's not far off that. For me personally, my drag came about because I went to an arts college, and being really honest, I expected to come out and I was studying a business course in an arts college, by the way. I stuck out like a sore thumb, but I really expected to come out and everyone to be like, oh my God, you're gay. Nobody cares in an arts-based college at all. And then I think I was just like, okay, well, what can I do next? Do you know what I mean? And that was a little bit of part of it. So I loved drag shows, and I think that's how I kind of just fell into it. I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. My drag and my identity are so different though. Like, drag is what I do to pay the bills, and I love being a performer and an entertainer. And then the show is done, and I love being in the corner with my friends talking and chatting out of drag, you know, that kind of way. I don't necessarily feel that it exists in a reality in that way. I just love being on stage. And I think, I know I'm not answering your question because I've completely forgot it, so I'm so sorry. But I think as well,
Okay, you are.
to make the point that drag really broke me down before it built me up. Like when I started to do drag, people didn't want to go on dates with me because I was a drag queen. This was 16, 17 years ago. They were like, no. Like, you know, now, even maybe only up to about 4 years, I think people are like, oh, that's pretty cool. So like in a way, and see it for what it is, and have a respect for the art form. And I think if anything lockdown has proved is that drag queens are really resilient, because there's been a lot of theater makers and artists who their work has not existed in lockdown, and there's been a lot of drag queens worldwide who are continuing to work and manage to pay bills. And that is because drag queens have to be the be all and end all, from making your costume to doing your hair to writing jokes, maybe to singing to dancing to acting. And a lot of those other art forms, you are one part of a cog in a whole system of other things. So that's been really interesting for me. And I'm so sorry, Kate, because I know I went completely different.
You really didn't. Viola, so how did you get into drag? How did you start?
I, like many young people, I kind of stumbled upon it on the internet. Like the first two drag queens I ever discovered were Willem and Shangela. Like they were the first two people I ever discovered. And like, I always think of this, I thought about this the other day, it just kind of came full circle for me in one way, because Willem follows me on Instagram, and like I would literally have the chats with her now and again. So like in my head, that just came full circle, that the first person I ever discovered kind of like, you know, knows who I am and they see what I do. But that's besides the point. But like I stumbled upon it on the internet, and then I started going out and going to the Georgian stuff. And then I saw, like, actually no, it wasn't even it was Promo, back when Promo was open, and I saw Pixie and Chanel. They were the two resident queens, and then like I kind of became friends with them, and I just started, you know, talking to them. And then I'd see, sorry, I don't know if I broke up or was I good? Oh, sorry. So basically, like it was in Promo, and then I went to seeing Pixie and Chanel, and then I started going to the George because I thought like Promo would be like an easy step into the scene. Boy, was I wrong. The George probably would have been a better way to go about it. But I went in, I started seeing Veda, Davina, I saw Victoria a few times, and I was just fascinated by the transformation of how people, like, they are one way in drag and one way out of drag, that like it really is a transformation, that like you become a totally different person, and then you just feel like you're a whole other entity. And then also it was, Victoria would say this, I annoyed the shit out of her, especially when she'd come to my news and she'd host like SU gigs and stuff, and like I talked to her, and you know, it was just seeing an insight of that like drag queens weren't these intimidating creatures that like you couldn't approach and everything. And then I did a Nudes versus DCU competition 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and I'm pretty sure Victoria was a judge at it. And then it was there that I ventured the first time in drag, and then I did that and I won that, which I didn't expect to win, because I went through against people who had been doing drag a while, like Dear Bitch, like Chris, he is doing SFX right now. Like I went up against those people. And then I didn't do it for a while, and it wasn't until Love Sensation last year that I'd go to the George every Wednesday, I'd see the queens, and I'd do the Vogue off every now and again. And then it was Veda would just be asking Pixie, because me and Pixie know each other and we're friends, and she was like to Pixie, oh, would he be interested in doing drag? And then Pixie just asked me, he's like, would you be interested in doing it? I was like, oh, I don't know. But I say, you know what, screw it. I bit the bullet, and then I did it the Wednesday after Love Sensation last year, which was probably like the first night out people had gone out since the weekend. And I still remember that show for definite. And I didn't think I'd still be doing it a year on, but you know, especially with lockdown, when lockdown started happening, because I was like, you know what, this is probably the end for me, because I didn't think I'm as popular as I am. I never thought I'd get to where I am. And then I just said, you know what, I'll just still do it. If I get more gigs, I get more gigs. If I don't, I don't. And I've just been gaining popularity over, which is kind of, it scares me, it confuses me that I gained such popularity within a year, you know? I thought I'd have to be working, like doing this for like ages before I even got like 1,000 followers on Instagram. But yeah, you have all the Dublin Queens to blame for releasing this creature out to the world.
That is perfect. That's actually a lovely segue to my next question. I just wanted to ask you too about your experiences in the drag scene in Ireland, and particularly in Dublin. I know, Victoria, I see your work with Dragged Up and you're very involved with all the Queens in the George. I'm like obsessed with all of you, and I was wondering how you find the scene. Is it supportive? Is it easy to get into?
No, I don't think it is, being really honest. And I think that we all think of the drag as a drag community, but we forget that actually each individual is a self-employed person. So, you know, my mortgage depends on me working, if that makes sense. So my focus, I often think of it like this: if I open a coffee shop on this street corner here and someone else opens a coffee shop right next door to you, that's two drag queens. It's exactly the same thing. You're both offering the same thing. I think that you can support each other with advice and listening, but at the end of the day, you know, it's an apprenticeship when you start drag. You have to do the work yourself. You have to show that you want to be that you want that job. Just like if you're going to be a plumber, you have to show up and earn very little money and just try and figure it out, because you learn on the job. So we don't have drag families here, as much as some people would say that we do. I don't think we do. We have good relationships with each other. Like, I will have girls' backs, absolutely. But essentially, you know, like Ireland's a small country. Do you know what I mean? There's only so much work. And, you know, that's often, me and Divine have spoke about this a lot, you know, and I think a core issue of why we fell out was maybe in relation to this. We were best friends, and then after about 10 years, we didn't speak for 2 years for many reasons. But, you know, it's quite hard to be best friends, to be co-workers, and also to be in the same zone and you know, trying to get work.
Yeah.
Which essentially is against each other. So you have to separate a lot out, and you have to focus on the positives, not get sucked into the negatives, which I believe in every aspect of life, we all need to do that, or else we just end up in dark places. And I think, I don't know, there's some sort of pressure put on drag in terms of it needs to be this really open, welcome community. And I think that's brilliant. But also, speaking personally, I need to pay my mortgage too.